I would like to start by acknowledging that Writing New South Wales is situated on unceded Wongal and Gadigal land. We are a writing organisation, so we're all here today because we are lovers of stories, and I think it is incredibly important to acknowledge that we exist on the land that has had storytelling as a part of its culture for tens of thousands of years, and I hope that we can hold space for that today. This is, was, and always will be Aboriginal land. Our guest today is Anne-Marie Te Whiu, who I will refer to going forward as Annie. Annie is an Australian-born Maori who belongs to the Te Raroa iwi in Hokianga in Aotearoa. She lives on unceded Gadigal and Wongal land, is a cultural producer, writer, editor, and weaver, and most recently edited Woven, which was published by Magabala Books. And it's really fantastic. I suggest that you pick up a copy. Her writing has been published broadly across Australia and Aotearoa, and her forthcoming debut poetry collection titled Metal will be published by University of Queensland Press. Welcome, Annie.
Kia ora. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
I just also want to acknowledge that I'm here on unceded Wongal and Gadigal country. Also want to echo what Elliot spoke about. We're on the unceded stolen lands of so-called Australia's First Peoples, and I want to acknowledge all First Nations peoples who are in the audience as well, and really acknowledge that we hold up high with deep respect our First Nations storytellers.
I'd like to start by asking you about your own poetic journey. So when did you start writing poetry?
Yeah, I mean, from day dot, I was actually reflecting on today's conversation and found a couple of old, you know, the little notebooks that we keep forever. This one's one I've got called Notes, and it's just filled with stuff, you know, the stuff we have. So that was when I was 5. So that's writing, but reading really came in early. Writing first and then reading kind of intercepted or took over because of my obsession with the object of the book. As a kid, I really loved those little books that had the key and the lock. You know, that immediately sparked my imagination. And whether or not I was writing poetry, Elliot, I was certainly writing words and language and playing and scribbling and swirling and pushing words to the corners of the page to understand what writing was, you know.
And what do you think it was about poetry that attracted you as an outlet compared to other forms of writing?
Yeah, poetry is a really interesting one. It's a weapon, isn't it? You can use it as a weapon, and you can also use it as a vehicle for connection. So for me, it's the way that poetry allows one to enter it from a different perspective. For me, there's more space on the page. There's more room for thoughts, for reflection, for interrogation, for questioning. So yeah, I love the form of poetry as well as the output.
And is becoming a poet something that you knew early on that you wanted to be?
No. No, certainly not. I just knew I wanted to be working with people. Yeah. And I still hold that as my greatest endeavor, to connect with people, to work with people, and to ultimately share stories.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose a lot of people don't realize that there is, you know, we understand that poetry exists, that we don't really sometimes realize that people are out there who are writing poetry as part of their career.
Yeah.
And what have you come to learn about that industry that maybe you didn't know before?
Yeah, an awful lot, to be very honest, because I've interacted and had dealings with and relationships with the industry from many different lenses. So I've never been within the publishing industry. I've never worked for a publisher, but I've worked for lots of organisations that have, or roles. And I'm thinking back to when I co-directed the Queensland Poetry Festival, for example. And we had to install our own bookstore, kindly run all by volunteers at the time. So that meant engaging with all of the publishers and understanding that process. And so that's from a festival director perspective. My most immediate interactions with publishers at the moment are, as you mentioned in your kind intro, that I've got my debut poetry collection coming out with University of Queensland Press. Fortunate enough that the incredible Māori Takatapui writer Esa Meirana Piri is editing it. So at the moment, I'm a poet interacting with a publisher, with the industry. But just prior to that, I was just editing Tony Birch's book and B.B. Backhouse's book, and working with Magabala as an editor for Woven. I also edited Solid Air with UQP. So what I'm trying to say is I understand that that's the industry, and I've kind of been circumferencing it and approaching it from different angles, but never from within. Oh no, I tell a lie. I founded a collective with 4 other incredible Māori writers, all based in New Zealand, in Aotearoa. And we created the Taraheke Collective. So Anahira Gilday, Nadine Anhura, Cass Barnett, and Michaela Keeble. We gathered to create our own press. And I'm excited to say that we ended up producing 2 really incredible books. I can leave the details of Taraheke if anyone's interested in. Yeah. So I did tell a lie. I have actually worked within the industry as a publisher, but certainly as a kind of more really from a perspective of questioning the industry rather than being absorbed into it or joining it, sort of sitting here.
Yeah, and in questioning the industry, and like you said, circumferencing it that way, have there been things that you've been pleasantly surprised to discover, like maybe avenues of support that the average aspiring poet might not be aware of?
Yeah. Maybe not that the average aspiring poet might not be aware of, not that element. I think that's a time thing, isn't it? I think that takes time for, if one is going to, and I'm assuming everyone is here because everyone wants that path or has had that path and would like to continue it. What I have noticed is certainly an arc of change, a shift in the way that the industry is considering, interacting with, and holding precious words from First Nations writers, from refugee writers, from people of colour, from Australian First Nations writers. So there has been certainly a massive shift I've seen in the last 15 years, that approach. Yeah.
And speaking of that, I'd like to ask a little bit about Woven, which is a really fantastic collection of First Nations poetry. I'm reading it at the moment. I've got about maybe a couple poems left, really taking my time enjoying them. The idea of publishing a collection of poetic conversations that span continents sounds really daunting. Can you tell us a bit about how that came together?
Yeah, and thank you so much for your support in buying the book, Elliot. Every book counts. Or anyone that's borrowing Woven from a library or requesting that their library order it in, thank you as well. Woven was planted in 2019 when I happened to have the privilege of sitting at a dinner table with Joy Harjo, who was America's first Native American poet laureate. Has just finished, I think it was 3 or 4 season stretch of being the poet laureate. So Joy Harjo came over and collaborated and met and worked with Ali Kobi Eckerman. I happened to be at that dinner with Joy and Ali. So two sisters who had never met, but were clearly watching each other from each other's, practices, and really seeing an alignment and a deep trust, and I think an Indigenous bond. They understood each other through the screen, through their writing. So being in that moment, when you're witness to extraordinary women interacting with each other that way, there's something incredibly, what a deep privilege, first of all. And then it actually literally had a cellular effect on being in that space with those wahine, those women, because of the way that they cherished and spoke about each other with such tenderness and passion and respect, so much respect. And I started thinking, maybe there's something in this. Why aren't they working together? How can we continue building this relationship so they can further understand each other? That's when the seed was planted. Then I went over to Aotearoa in 2020, I think it was, or 2019, to a Māori Writers Hui, a biannual event where Māori writers from around Aotearoa gather and connect and talk and laugh and reflect and question. And it was in that moment there that I was like talking about a lot of First Nations writers, Indigenous writers from Australia. And I found that not many Māori writers knew, and vice versa. So as someone that traverses that watery highway regularly, I'm really wanting to bring people together. So that was another seed that went, oh yeah, okay, keep growing. And then I had the honor of working at Red Room Poetry starting in 2020. I like words, not numbers. Sorry, I don't know where we're up to in the chronology of it all. But working at Red Room Poetry is such a brilliant organisation, and that's where I was able to develop and have the time and space to create, amongst many other projects like Poetry Month, the annual Poetry Month that happens every August. So that was exciting, starting that project. But yeah, Fair Trade was the project that developed in that time, and then that led to the evolution of Woven.
And from my understanding, a lot of that overlapped with COVID. So you were trying to organize people in different countries at a time when they couldn't meet together.
I was thinking, Elliot, did this event start during COVID?
This event before COVID was in person, and it transitioned online during COVID.
So it's we all did it. Organizations and individuals did it. We reshaped and rethought the way that we can access and interact with each other. So you're exactly right. Yeah, COVID was certainly a push to, this is how this project can be shaped digitally. Yeah. I still remember that the first few days of the shutdown and understanding what Zoom was. I thought someone was saying a stupid word. Remember when you heard the word Zoom at first? It's like, and now it's, yeah.
Yeah, now it's a verb as well. And like Google or Skype or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to ask about two particular pieces in Woven that I found really interesting. So the first is Circuit Breaker by Ellen Van Dierven and Layli Long Soldier.
Yes.
And the other one is Sky Rivers by Jazz Money and Cassandra Barnett.
Stunning poem.
They definitely are. And both of them, I think, really interestingly include a lot of visual elements. You know, you have in the first one, like almost charts and graphs in the poem. And then in Sky Rivers, you have big, long, squiggly lines running down the page. Do you think that publishers are generally receptive to those kinds of visual experimentations?
Yes, I do, is the short answer, Elliot. Very, very much so. And I think if there's, context is everything. If you sent in a manuscript that was just full of everything, poems that you've just described in that way, you would have to have a really strong case for justifying why you have gone with that methodology. But I think it's about your relationship with who you're wanting to publish with. If people who are watching are considering publishing digitally, then it's actually the opposite. people, the editor or the publisher of the journal will push you and say, push those words off the page, just keep playing and doing what you want, because the digitality of the poem needs to sing from the screen, as opposed to, I mean, publishers and editors, that's really just, that's a process issue. How nimble can the publishing house be, and how adept can they be with managing a shift and a different way of presenting a poem? It all really, really depends. I think someone, you know, say, for example, Penguin or a really massive organization would have the staffing and the capacity and the time to navigate working a poem that way. But perhaps, whereas say maybe a volunteer-run journal, maybe there's a young uni student that wants to push poetry onto the screens, and that's a really beautiful way of getting published as well.
Yeah, and on that note, on the different, you know, avenues that exist out there for poets, it can seem a little bit like there are only a handful of places that are left that are dedicated to publishing, you know, print poetry. You know, many journals and publishers just don't accept unsolicited poetry submissions at times. Where do you think poets should be looking to submit or publish their work?
It's a good question. And it really depends on where the writer is at in their journey. So I first started publishing in zines. My very, very first publications were zines. So I was publishing in friends that made their own works. So that was like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And for me, that was massive. That was significant. My words on a page in a zine with other people. Really, really cool. And I still hold zines up as equally important as high as a, yeah, traditional publication. Zines, you can get away with everything. There's so much freedom in zines. So that's from that context. Whereas if someone is wanting to publish their manuscript for the first time, I would probably suggest that they, if none of those pieces have been published yet, that's the first thing. If you're putting out a collection, a poetry collection, start getting your favorite poems, or the poems that you know can handle it, that can test drive. Extract one of those poems from your manuscript and submit it to a digital, a smaller run digital journal for the experience, for the process. I don't know about everyone else, but I learn by doing, and that process helps me understand, okay, I get my text, it's final, maybe I get a reader, maybe I don't, maybe I just hit send, goes to the editor, work with the editor, get a final run on what will be published, and then it's published. There's that process. I feel like I'm probably better equipped to answer more specific questions if maybe in the Q&A, if anyone has a specific situation that they'd like advice on, I'm really happy to address it then. But just to very broadly speaking now, really emphasize the beauty and the quality of a zine or a handmade or a self-published work. I really value that work. And dealing with publishers is, wow, what a landscape. And I mean, there are individuals working in all of these publishing houses. And my strongest advice would be to get to know the editors, connect with an editor, ask to go in and have a cuppa, ask if you can have a Zoom with them for 15 minutes, connect with someone. And again, that comes back to where I am at in my practice, which is relationality. Have the relationship with a person that you can work with. Yeah.
And how would you suggest that people approach that initial conversation with an editor or publisher?
Go to events. I'm also a very much a face-to-face person. Go to events. Sydney Writers Festival is coming up. I think the South Coast Writers Festival is happening in, what is it? Coming up. Blue Mountains Writers Festival is coming up. There's a Manly Festival was last week or the week before. There's stuff happening in Bankstown. There's stuff happening over, there's so much that go to Sappho Books, go to events. Better Read Than Dead, Winnie Dunn's launch is coming up. The incredible Dirt Poor Islander. Like, there's just so much stuff happening in the scene. And my suggestion would be, whilst you're at those events, the editor or the publisher is always at a launch. Go and say hi. Just say hi and let them know. And then just slowly start to, you'll see it, the industry is both mammoth and minuscule, isn't it? It's this really interesting contradiction of being this epic thing, and yet when you go to events, you do see the same. Yeah.
And speaking of that mammoth industry, I felt that maybe, a lot of people felt that poetry was a popular art form decreasing in popularity for a long time, but it
Did
seems,
you hear that, Elliot?
I think it's a thing that a lot of people have felt, but with things like poetry slams and Instagram poetry, we have a whole new audience that are coming on board. And how do you see that new wave fitting in with the existing publishing space?
Yeah. I think Amanda Gorman's speech at Biden's inauguration was it the inauguration? Is that the word? Where that moment where she took to the microphone really elevated spoken word and poetry to, it kind of transcended borders as well. Like, it really did hit beyond that country's political boundaries. And I do think that was a significant moment in the shift. I think Rupi Kaur's work on Instagram, she's just been plowing away at it for years. People like Kay Tempest, who's really strong on Instagram as well, those leading spoken word figures that have just been, those people who I have so much respect for, that online presence, and just keep putting that work out. So I do see the publishing industry as responding to the shift in the way that spoken word has become, just maybe a much more respected form. And that was actually part of that. I have the archival fever. So I've got a real thing for going into archives and unearthing and looking what's there. And I wanted to create something for the archive. I hope that this book shows people in 100 years, what was spoken word poets doing in Australia between 2010 and 2020. What was topical, what was social, what was political, whose voices were being heard.
I think you read my mind, because my next question was actually going to be about Solid Air. So that's very timely that you held that up then. Another fantastic collection as well. The idea of getting a print anthology of spoken word published sounds like a really daunting challenge. How did that come together?
Yeah, that was as a result of working in a collaborative format after Queensland Poetry Festival, shifting from that co-director to a co-editing space. So that was a very natural evolution to kind of go. I don't know if anyone in the watching has directed festivals, but it certainly takes its toll, and it's nice to bounce in and out of that organizing role to being the artist, or to being a much more just working in a different way. So shifting from working as a festival director to an editor. And as I said previously, I was working in that capacity. I had a relationship with the publisher. So we just kind of extended that relationship and spoke about and proposed Solid Air in that way. Yeah.
And I imagine there was probably a lot of translation work required to take pieces that, were intended for the stage and then to put them on the page.
You would think so. If you were editing, I think editing is such editing is very, very personal, isn't it? Well, for me, it is. I operate from everything that I carry with me to that moment, reading someone else's work. And I wanted the voice to speak as true as it could on the page. So certainly there were some suggestions and notes and edits that went back, but it was very much empowering and giving the autonomy to the poet for them to lay the work out how they how they wanted. And I carried that same principle to woven and really had a conversation with the writer rather than saying, you should, this would work better here, rather than being instructional, opening up questions and allowing the poet to, have that autonomy to make changes where they saw fit. Yeah.
Yeah, and speaking of, we've mentioned the different avenues for poets to look into, and for all poets, but especially for spoken word poets.
Yeah.
What does publication mean for them? Do you think it will always mean getting their spoken word work into a print collection, or do you think that they should be looking elsewhere as well?
Yeah. It all depends on the individual. It really, really does. Every spoken word artist that I know has gone on to publish either poems or a collection. So maybe the tide has turned that, we don't want to just have words in the air. We want them on the page for everyone as well. Maybe that's the new way, the new evolution. It will probably be like records, in 50 years, it will be like, I am never publishing. I am only performing my work live, either be there or miss it. Maybe that will be a way that the industry will shift.
I suppose, and looks like someone has actually just suggested in the chat as well, which was going to be my next question. Do you think things like video or audio could be other avenues that maybe
Love that.
over, or
whoever said that, I love that. Not only from an aesthetic comfort level for an able-bodied person, but also just for straight up, let's prioritize access. And yes, audio books, yes, and translated different languages, yes. I wish someone would start their own independent audiobooks organization company, because we all just default to Audible, but it'd be really cool if someone did the same model as publishing. You know how there are different publishing houses? If we had different audiobook houses that specialized in
different genres and things like that. Yeah, that would be great to have a poetry specific audiobook.
Precisely right. That's what I'd love to. Yeah. Having said that, there are so many great poetry dedicated podcasts, so many. Top of mind is maybe The Slowdown, Tracy K. Smith, and Tracy K. Smith used to run that, but now I think Ada Lemoyne who is the new Poet Laureate of America, just got installed this year. Yeah.
Now, this might be a very difficult question. So
go on then.
So feel free to not stick to the number that I give you, but if you could highlight 3 contemporary Australian poets that you think everyone interested in the art form should be reading, who comes to mind?
Who do you think?
Well, I'll get you to answer first, and then
No, I'd love to know who you tell me. Who do you...
Ones that comes to mind for me, I think Sarah Saleh.
Yeah.
I think Eunice Andrada.
Eunice. What an
And I think Omar Sakar. Probably be the 3 that come to mind for me, but I would love to hear your suggestions as well.
Yeah, I could. Thank you so much for indulging me there, Elliot. I also could easily say, of course, those 3 writers, Eunice, Omar, and Sarah. Yeah, everyone should go buy Flirtation of Girls. Everyone should follow Omar Sakar, that's Sakr, on Instagram, and go buy, what was his latest collection?
Unessential Work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That won the Prime Minister's Award, eh? Didn't it?
Was either that one or the Lost Arabs. It was one of the 2.
Arabs. Yeah. So thank you for giving me some buying time to think about my 3. So I would, first and foremost, I'd have to say Ellen Van Neerven, who for me just constantly cracks something open. I'm really glad that you mentioned the work that they did with Layli Long Soldier in Woven previously, and the fact that you noted that poem coming Yeah, Ellen is all, every time I speak with Ellen, their projects and the way that they operate and think and write are beyond, so far ahead of what feels like this time Ellen's operating and able to write from a different time and space and bring us all along. Heat and Light, what a book. Heat and Light, incredible book. Ellen. So contemporary is tricky because we associate contemporary with age. And I would love to maybe flip that and think about someone like Janine Lane, who, so Jeanine Leane. I think Leanne is a Wiradjuri writer, but has been at the forefront of fighting for emerging older voices. So I'll say Janine, not only for what the work that Janine does, but also for, their incredible writing, really potent, fierce writer. I think their collection, Walk Back Over, and they've just got a new publication that's coming out with, or has come out with, University of Queensland Press. So Ellen and Janine and contemporary, far out, man. Can I give 10?
If you have 10 to give.
I just really value these moments of sharing names with people.
That's why I had the question.
Really make sure.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, maybe just because I was speaking to him the other, maybe Samuel Wagon Watson. Amazing human and writer. He won the Patrick White Award in 2020, I think it was. Comes from a long line of incredible activists and writers and musicians. So I'd say Samuel Wagon Watson, Ellen Van Neerven and Janine Lane, with many, many, many more standing right beside them.
It's really hard to, like I said, it was going to be the most difficult question.
I know, because when you said Eunice, Sarah and Omar, I'm like, well, they're the three.
May or may not be a more difficult question, hopefully a bit more relaxed. Outside of poetry, what else do you like to read?
I love a good graphic novel. I like lines on the page and the way that graphic artists work and push and pull and tell stories. I really love, I mentioned archives earlier. So I'll read a lot of archival work. I'll read a lot of, I'll return to books. I'm a big returner of books. So I'm actually a shocker. A book comes in regularly to the house, but then I'll go back to the books that I've already got and go, oh, I'd better get back to that one and save that one for. So it's just this constant book struggle. But so I'll do things like go back to old books. Both of my parents have passed and they were both incredibly great readers, and thank God they left their beautiful, a couple of books behind that I deeply, deeply treasure. So I also return to books to connect with people, to spark ideas. So I'll go back to things like this gorgeous this was my dad's, published in 1955, Myths and Legends of Maori Land. So I don't have a default, I'll go to that. It depends.
I have one more question before we get to the audience Q&A.
Yeah.
So your own poetry collection, Metal, is on the horizon. Where should we be keeping an eye on to find out when and where we can get our hands on it?
Oh, that's really beautiful and generous of you to say. Thank you. Just go to University of Queensland Press publishing site and it will be out in February 2025, which, yeah. How many months? Oh my gosh. I've got to submit the final manuscript in June. So I'm just working with SNL to do that. Yeah. That's been 8 years in the making, that my debut collection. I don't know if other people can track that kind of, but yeah, I'll be very happy when it takes flight. because I've already started working on my next project. So yeah, as we do.
And I'll be very happy to read it when it comes out as well. So
cheers, Elliot.
So we'll move on now to some of the audience questions. It's some really great questions. So Megan has asked, are there any trends that you've noticed in the types of poetry being chosen for publication?
Yeah, there are, and it's according to the publishing house. I've noticed an increase, for example, in the output of, does everyone know Magabala Publishing House, which Woven was published through? I've noticed a real increase in First Nations output. Like their book list has just grown. It seemed that they used to publish quite a few, not too many, and now it's expanded. I've noticed that Aviva Tuffield at University of Queensland Press is really sharp and really has her eye on the ball with what's happening with contemporary poetry at the moment, and is signing some incredible poets. So yeah, there's just been a shift at that publishing house in terms of, from my perspective, how their publications are being curated. I've noticed there's been a real sort of the poets that kind of came up in that rise of that 2010, those spoken word poets, are now putting books out. So this is the spoken word poetry kind of time. I've noticed that political voices are being really respected and loved by the publishing houses, but really taking a toll in society at the moment. There's a lot of I think, the genocide has certainly created a different way for publishing houses to speak to our times. And I think we'll see that over the next, certainly over the next 12 months, whose voices will reflect these times, Yeah,
it's art always has that sort of,
exactly.
responsibility, definitely.
Yeah.
We have a question here from another Meg, probably not the same person.
Hi, Meg.
What are the benefits of self-publishing a poetry book compared to finding a publisher to do so?
Yeah. So time is the first thing. So you run to your own timeline with a publishing house. So I signed my contract for Metal last year, and I've had to wait until February 2025. Just that, the silver lining is I have more time to put the collection together. But ultimately, when we write a manuscript and it's ready, you want it to go. You don't want to be waiting for. So if I had self-published, it would be out there by now. That's so your own timeline. You manage your own voice. You're your own editor. You can, when you're working with a publisher, you're often told who your editor is, rather than, you work within the editor of the publishing house, as opposed to going to someone or approaching someone that you would like to work with. You have that freedom. You have autonomy about where your work is put and how it's distributed. You have autonomy about whether or not you want to sell your book, or if you self-publish, or if you want to. So when you publish your book, you get, 10 or 20 complimentary copies. If you're self-publishing, you got all the copies. You have all the freedom. So, but you also are your own distribution team. So, yeah, it's probably exposure is the biggest thing. That the biggest gap would be exposure, or that the distribution mechanism, and things like, your publisher can pitch you to a festival or pitch you to an event, as opposed to you doing all the cold calling. But if people were to do that, if people are choosing that self-publishing route, I would recommend that they form a collective and connect, because self-publishing can be quite isolating. So even if you have someone else that you can collaborate with within that collective, yeah. I'm very pro collectives. I think people should connect and collaborate a lot more. Yeah.
Definitely. And that really reflects in the nature of Woven as well.
Yeah, it's
collaborative connection. Yeah.
I mean, being a weaver, I like to bring people together. I like to have,
We have a question here from Waitahi.
Oh, kia ora.
When you realized you were ready to publish a book of your work, how did you first go about initiating those conversations with the publisher?
Oh, that was a scary moment. That wasn't a call, that was an email. And I made sure that the manuscript that I was sending through was the very, very, very best that it could possibly be, knowing that there would be work to be done on it. But I didn't want to, you only get one moment to send an email to a publisher, don't you? You can't go, oh no, actually, sorry, can you please read this version? And like you just get that one email with the attachment and you want it to be right. And off the back of this comes back to that relationality again, off the back of having co-directed Queensland Poetry Festival, off the back of having co-edited Solid Air with the publisher, I had a solid interaction and a relationality with the publishing house. So it was a natural extension. It wasn't an out of the blue, hey, I know you haven't heard of me, but I believe in my work and I would love your help publishing it, which I would also do. I'd happily send that email 1,000 times. I'm very happy with rejections. Rejections have certainly guided me and made me stronger. They've led me to where I'm meant to be published and write.
And I think developing a relationship with rejection is a thing that,
Huge.
anyone who's engaged with the publisher will say, yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And, those rejection letters from competitions and, yeah, you have to have a bit of metal.
There we go. We have a question from Eugen. Do you find that working across your different hats as a publisher and editor and a poet informs how and what you write and how you edit?
Because I'm in different communities.
And the different roles and engaging with the industry in different ways.
Yeah, it does shape. Yeah. It does shape how I write and what I write. Absolutely is the answer to that question. But Eugen, I don't know if they've worn many hats as well, if that's a natural thing to do. For me, that's my comfort zone, is having, okay, I've got to do that over there, because that's my personality. I like that expansiveness. I like holding multitudes. I like, a multiplicity of art and projects to be working on. But that suits me. Maybe Eugen is quite singular in their attention and just likes to focus on one project and get it through. But yeah, wearing all of those hats certainly does feed and inform the way I write, definitely.
Bruce asks, do you believe that the discipline of writing poetry, saying more with less, using beat, mood, and rhythm, do you think that benefits all types of writing, be it fiction or nonfiction?
Yes, I do, because I look at the poetry manuscript as, in a similar way, I look at a treble clef. So the musicality of language, yes, is the answer. I definitely do. Bruce?
All right, we have another question from Eugen. It might be a bit of a tricky one. Do you think that generative AI and the proliferation of writers and poets might affect the industry?
Yeah, it's a big question. And if you go to I'll be looking forward to what they discuss at Sydney Writers Festival. The major festivals are discussing AI at the moment, and it's a big one. And I think it's about time as well, because AI is already out the gate. Hey, so we need to understand how to, not being a tech head, I sort of, my lens of AI is that it's something that I can hopefully utilize and play with and understand. I don't want it to do that to me, though. I don't want it to use and understand me. So it's again, we're all going to be having relationships with AI, and it's, how do we do that? How do we navigate? How much do we let in? AI, it's such a tricky one. But I am also equally fascinated by it. It does intrigue me.
Yeah, it's definitely a question that I think a lot of writers and creatives in general are curious about, and it'll probably take a few years before we really know the answers to those questions.
Yeah, I wonder if 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 people are actually engaging with AI consciously. It's such a, yeah.
We have a question from Jan.
Mm.
Please explain a little more what you mean by pushing words off the page. This was
Yeah.
this is when we're talking
What?
about digital publishing. Yeah. Yeah, what are you talking about?
So yes, we're all poets. We like to play with language and not be literal. We're being metaphorical. I like to wait. What I mean, Jan, is I like to put all of the words in a bowl and mix them up and then get the pastry and lay it out and see where it lands. I don't write from a beginning, middle, and end perspective. I don't have that kind of process. I don't have that way of approaching the page. I have moments and I'll put those words down and then I might put other words down over here. But by no means am I conforming to a line by line. Yeah. So as much as I love performance poetry, I love performance on the page. I like the letters to have their own time and space to do their thing too, if the poem asks it and needs it.
Hmm. Um,
What does Jan think it means, I wonder?
Wonder. Maybe Jan can let us know in the chat box.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah. Anne asks, I have always written poetry and have been told that poetry doesn't have a basis for publication. What do you think about this?
Who asked that one?
Anne.
I would love to talk with Anne. Who told you that? It's because these are things we get told. These are things we're told. They don't come from within us. They're things that the industry or society or our family, because they don't understand or they don't want to understand or they don't have the capacity. Do you feel like your work could get published? Then let's start with that. Start with that. That's what we know. Your work would be good published. So, and have you published digitally yet? Okay, so there are lots of options. You don't necessarily have to publish something in a book. When I say digitally, I mean that there are lots of businesses, organizations, writing organizations out there where your poem can be published on a website. So it's a different way of thinking. So you would be sending a digital link to your friends and family to read your work rather than sending them a book. Yeah. Red Room Poetry is a really good starting point, Anne. If you look up Red Room Poetry, they have so the Poetry Month they have on. If you're on social media, they're good to follow throughout August. You can respond to prompts that are put up every day. But just, yeah, that really saddened. Yeah, it's that idea of, the industry, my writing's not good enough to be published or whatever. I think when we're in spaces like this, we really need to magnify the opposite and say to Anne, no, there's value in your work. Publish, pursue publishing. You're amongst friends, and that's where I'm again returning to the idea of the collective that we, and you need to get a writing buddy, someone that you can write with.
I have a response here from Jan. So Jan asked the question about pushing words off the page.
Yeah.
And Jan was wondering if that was more of a metaphor or a concrete activity referring to the visual aspects of the poem, like, throwing the words all over the page.
Yeah, it's both. It's metaphorical, but it's also literally putting the words on the page where I believe they go. Because I am the author, that is my page, and I have the power and the control to put the words. I'm telling the story. There's just, a lot of strength in that, knowing that. Nothing wrong with where you put the words on the page. That's the other thing. I really wish people would loosen up with their first attempt at writing work. You don't tell someone who picks up a guitar for the first time, like, oh, that you're not very good at it, put it down. It's keep doing it.
Definitely. We have a question from Marika. who asks, how do you find your weaving and your writing speak to each other? This is from someone who loves both poetry and tapestry weaving.
Who's that?
Marika or Marika, perhaps?
Mika. Oh, I'd love to see their work. Yeah, I've consciously chosen those two practices because they're in conversation with each other. So the way that has the output of those two practices being in conversation, an example would be when I collaborated with a Maori sound artist called Ariana Tikau, and Ariana would send me audio files of work that she had made, and then I would weave in response to those audios. I'd weave like sound panels, and then I'd write in response to my sound panel. I created my own constraints so that productivity would happen. I need constraints and I need a deadline, otherwise it's very difficult.
Yeah, I think I'm quite the same. Yeah.
But yeah, just to answer that question, yeah, writing and weaving, also they're just nice practices to exchange. When I've written a bit and I want to have a break, I'll go and weave. They're really simpatico. They really talk to each other. Yeah.
We have a question here from Lucy. So we did talk about this a little bit earlier, but Lucy is wondering, why do you think there appears to be a growing interest in poetry?
Well, money talks. So the biggest book of Sydney Writers Festival in 2022, I think it was, the Evelyn Araluan one, Drop Bear. So the biggest bookseller at the year that Evelyn won was Drop Bear. So it's moments like that where the industry goes, oh, okay. And by the industry, that kind of ripples out to bookstores, to festival pundits, to producers, to publishers, So why do I think poetry is on the rise? Because of moments like that. Because because the public are asking for it. And not only that, the publishers are listening and they're producing work, they're publishing poetry that people clearly want. Dark times lead to poetry, always. And these are pretty much the darkest of times. So, yeah, we turn to poetry. Yeah. So I think from a capitalist perspective, poetry has just been selling more. But then from a societal, what's good for our communities, poetry is balm, poetry is a salve. Yeah.
Benjamin has a question coming back to AI.
Oh, no. Okay.
One worry about AI is whether it will flood the market with volume and obscure actual human poetry.
Yeah.
What do you think poets can do to counter that?
Yeah. Well, Benjamin. Yeah, I need more time to think about this. And I'd love to know if Benjamin's actually in the industry, what his role is. Sounds like he might be connected to digital working in some way, at least. I think poets will always do what poets have always done, which is we will write up against it. So poets will always write up against AI. For every AI, there'll be 10 poets who want to write back. So, poetry is one of many forms of resistance against that, which we do not want in our world. But yeah, coming back to that initial thing of poetry being a weapon, poetry can work, poetry can withstand AI, I'm sure. Yeah. I'd love to. Did Benjamin reply and say, oh, no, not in the AI industry? I write things. Cool. Good on you, Benjamin.
I think we have one last question. Eugen was curious, do you perform or read out loud your own poetry in public spaces?
Yes, all the time.
Where can
Where can
people find you?
So I'm fortunate enough to be programmed at quite a few festivals and really love sharing my work at festivals. I'm at Sydney Writers Festival alongside BB Backhouse and Jazz Money. I think Daniel Browning maybe. There's Omar, I think Omar Saker's in that lineup. So that's on the Saturday night of the Sydney Writers Festival. I'm also in the Brisbane Writers Festival, speaking with Sam Wagon-Watson and Sigbjørn Skården from Norway. I'm in the Blue Mountains Writers Festival. There are others, there's other. The short answer is yes. I do.
Go to a writers festival and you'll probably be there. Yeah, so that's all that we have time for today. Thank you everyone in our audience for joining us, and a very, very big thank you to you, Annie, for chatting with us today.
Elliot, can I just jump in before you wrap up and just genuinely say how grateful I am to yourself and Sophie at Writing New South Wales for the incredible work that you are all doing. Thank you from the writing community. And I also want to very much extend thanks to everyone here. Yeah, time is our most precious commodity. So thank you for sharing your time with me. I've loved it.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. Our next First Friday event will be held on Friday, the 3rd of May. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, Newsbite, for more information. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you at another Writing New South Wales event soon.